Hey guys, it's Stan here. In this week's video we will talk about a very unknown topic in finance, which is family offices. In this week's video we will talk about family offices for the super rich. So in this video you will learn two things. First of all, what is a family office? And second of all, how are family offices used by the super rich to invest? So in other terms, how do they invest? Let's get started, guys. First question, what is a family office? Well, a family office, the definition is it's a private investment firm controlled by a family. Actually, it's not a new concept. It's actually very old. The innovation took place in 1882 when the first family office took place or was set up in 1882 by a certain Mr. Rockefeller, the first billionaire in the world who made a fortune with his oil empire actually. Then what happened actually with family offices is they became less and less popular in the 1950s, 60s, 70s because actually a lot of specialist companies popped up, such as the wealth management, banks and specialized investment firms actually. But what happened, and especially since the beginning of the 2000s with the first dot-com crash, and especially afterwards in 2007, 2008 with the big financial crisis and the mismanagement of banks and the big financial scandals, is actually that the big billionaires, the big family, the big rich families actually, they had a bigger mistrust against banks and large firms because of the scandals, because of the high fees and actually the bad investments. So what happens here, and I think the best way to understand a family office is, first of all, let's look at what is going on usually when it's not a family office. Imagine you're a very rich person, like a billionaire. Usually you will use a wealth management company such as UBS, for example, or BlackRock. And these companies will invest in behalf of you into, for example, stocks, different companies, bonds, and all these kind of different assets, right? What is happening with a family office is actually this function here is going in-house again. In other words, the wealth management company becomes the family, it becomes family controlled basically. Here, of course, when you are a UBS or when you are BlackRock, you are a financial market company, you are publicly traded usually, you have a lot of financial information that has to be disclosed to the market. This is not happening when you're taking it indoor and call it a family office. So the idea behind it is actually that the family office hires an investment pro, hires very special guys for taxes and for legal, and then they just invest by themselves actually. So this is the first very important stuff you have to understand related to family offices. Well, if you think that family offices are just, you know, a little thing, a little shop next to the financial markets, think again, because roughly it is estimated that all the billionaires combined today have about 9 trillion in assets, which is 9,000 billions, roughly 2 times the GDP of Japan. And half of these 9 billion are estimated to be in family offices. So about 3 to 4 trillion, which is the size of the GDP of, well, let's say Germany about, are invested in family offices. So we are really talking about big money and big stuff here. Again, why are they in family offices? Well, because they are privately controlled. What does it mean? It means they are opaque, so not transparent, and they do not have to disclose any financial information. The big difference between a family office and, let's say, a hedge fund or a private equity company or a private asset manager, for example, is that usually these kind of companies have disclosure agreements to the financial markets, so actually everybody can know, everybody who knows finance and can read finance knows how the very rich invest. This is not the case in a family office because, as I just mentioned, it's very opaque and there are no disclosure agreements because it's private money invested privately actually. What you also have to know is that, of course, in a family office, the average family office has like 10, 12, 15 employees for a single family that involves, of course, a lot of investment pros, tax lawyers, legal stuff, and these kind of things. But for very big families like the Mullier family in France, which has about 600 people inside this family, well, you can imagine that the running costs of such a family office are much higher. So for whom is it? Of course, it's for the super rich, but to give you a number here, it becomes interesting if you have assets invested higher than 100 or 100 to 150 million US dollars, because otherwise the running costs of all your stuff is way too high to justify these kind of expenses. This also explains why you have single or multiple family offices. Single family offices are for the very, very wealthy big families, let's say the Bill Gates of the world, or the George Soroses of this world, you know. And what happens usually once the single family offices become popular and made themselves a good name, well, usually then a lot of maybe a bit less richer families want to join them, and this is why it becomes a multi-family office with different branches around the world, for example. Family office are generally called the butler for the super rich, which is a pretty good expression, because actually what is the purpose of a family office? Well, it's beyond investing actually, and this is also what differentiates a family office from a pure, let's say, private equity firm or hedge fund, is that actually the purpose of a family office is, first of all, preserve or multiply the wealth. That depends on how conservative or aggressive you invest, of course, but then it also checks and pay the bills, because the rich people found out that, for example, a lot of yacht companies are notorious for overcharging because nobody looked at the invoices and stuff like that. And family offices also organize a lot of stuff. If you need to go from A to B and go to your yacht, use your jet, and all these kind of fancy rich people problems, you know, they organize all that stuff. And they also do something which is very important. It's everything related to succession. You know, usually a billionaire, let's imagine Bill Gates, for example, he will, let's say, if he has several kids, there's always going to be some heritage problems and succession problems. And actually all that stuff is usually, if it's well done, it's organized in advance, so there are no big problems related to goals when it comes to succession and these kind of things. So now that you know what family offices are, let's answer the second question. How do the super rich invest in these family offices? Well, first of all, of course, it depends on the goal, as I mentioned before. Do you want to preserve or do you want to multiply your wealth? You will not invest the same way if you want to be very conservative and preserve your cash and your wealth generally, or if you want to multiply and be very aggressive, of course. But what we can say is that generally, the average portfolio is very diversified, of course, and usually it's also diversified away from the core business. Let me give you an example. For example, Jack Ma, who is the founder and CEO of Alibaba, for example, he of course has a family office because he's the richest man or the second richest man in China, and he is diversifying away from all technology, and especially he's diversifying away from Alibaba just to make his bets a little bit safer, of course. What we also can say when we look at the average family office portfolio, the data I'm showing you right now is from 2018, and as I just mentioned, it's very opaque, so it's not easy to get information. This is a source from UBS, the investment bank or wealth management bank. As you can see here, most is in equity, so about 28% equity, 16% bonds, and then you have a big portion of private equity, so direct investments and funds, about 18% properties, meaning real estate. Then you have a bit of speculation in the hedge funds, and then of course you also have a bit of cash and a bit of commodities. The cash is very interesting because it allows you to do maybe some crazy stuff or to deal with crisis and these kind of things. What is also interesting when you look at this graph is the direct investments or the private equity section. As you can see, it's about 20%. And that means that, as I just mentioned, they are very wealthy people with a lot of money, of course. So when they start to directly invest into entire companies, that becomes kind of a big challenge also for the competition, such as hedge funds, such as private equity companies who only do that because, well, they are the new whale, if you want. So they become a real threat when it comes to competition and when it comes to, well, acquiring companies. Now, your question might be, why should a company accept to be bought by such a family office? Well, what is very interesting with family office from a company's point of view is if a family office invests in your company, it's usually for a very long horizon, at least 10 years or plus. This is something you usually don't get from hedge funds or from private equity companies because they usually need to flip your company, so to sell your company back to someone else in 5 to 7 years. This is how they make money. For a family office, you don't have that kind of pressure, especially if you are more like a conservative investor. And this is very appealing for companies who are being bought by these kind of institutions here. What you also have to understand, and that's kind of a threat for finance in general, is that family offices, of course, are extremely well connected. When you have super billionaire, super rich person like Bill Gates or Jack Ma or George Soros, you have very good connection to governments, to finance guys and Wall Street and so on. So the question is always, do they have a big information advantage or not? Because usually one of the rules in finance is to say every investor should have the same level of information at the same time. This is not sure, of course, because as a family office and when you are well connected, well, you probably have an advantage of information here. And then, of course, there's also the question of discipline, because as I just mentioned earlier, it's a very opaque fund. And if something like that blows up, what does it do to the market? So can the market discipline these kind of family offices? Don't forget, they're very powerful. So when you mix powerful with not transparent, usually that's not a great combination. What speaks for family offices and what is interesting is, first of all, they invest long term, so that's usually a good sign. And second of all, they don't have, when they invest, they don't use a lot of leverage. What is leverage? Leverage is the level of debt you use to finance an investment. Because family offices, and that makes a lot of sense, they invest with less than 20% debt, which is a good thing, because if you invest with less debt, that makes the risk of damage for the entire economy or for finance smaller, of course, because that always means that someone else is getting involved in your problems. So now that you know what family offices are and how rich people invest, I wanted to ask you, what do you think about family offices? Do you think it's a clever move from the rich people? Do you think it's controversial, or do you think it's good? Let me know in the comment section below. Otherwise, I wanted to let you know that I post once a week every Sunday. So if you like that kind of content, corporate finance, market finance, make sure to like. It takes me about 6-7 hours with research and cutting and stuff. Don't forget to subscribe if you want more of that content. Otherwise, enjoy, have a great week, stay smart, see you soon. Bye bye, guys.